Welcome to the East Bay Agility Meetup. Instead of an in-person meetup this month, we are doing a webinar. So thank you everyone for attending and joining us. And please stay tuned on meetup.com for our upcoming events and upcoming meetups. We'll be having more this year, so we're excited to start off the new year and in January, and we're happy to have our speaker today, Bob Galen, and he's going to be talking to us on an exciting topic of Agile adoption and Agile testing, and talking about the 3 pillars that he wrote a book about. And so we're very, very excited to introduce him. He's the Director of Agile Practices at Zenergy Technologies. He's also the President and Head Coach at RGCG. And Bob regularly speaks at conferences and professional groups. He's a certified enterprise coach. He's a certified Scrum product owner, and he's written 3 books about Agile. So we're very excited to have him. We will be having a Q&A at the end of Bob's presentation, so please enter any questions that you have in the questions dialog box on your computer. And so we're almost ready to get started, but before we do, Bob has graciously donated a few of his books to be raffled off, and so we're going to be raffling one of them off today and a few other ones off in future meetups. And so out of everyone who's registered to attend, I'm drawing names out of a hat. And the book that we're raffling off today is The 3 Pillars of Agile Quality and Testing, and it's by Robert Galen, our speaker today. And so I'm literally going to do the raffle right now, draw some names, and I won't say any last names since we are recording this and publicizing it, but we do have your emails, and we will reach out to you to get the book to you. Drum roll, please. All right, our winner today for the book is Danny. Danny will be emailing you and sending you the book. So thank you for participating. Thank you for being here, everybody. And without further ado, I will turn the time over to Bob Galen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Rick. I appreciate you all inviting me to present today, so it's my pleasure to talk with the group. I'm coming to you from North Carolina, so I'm on the other coast. And it's sunny here. It's been rainy for a while, but sunny and a nice day. I hope you're having a nice day as well. This is a little bit about me, and Rick went into it as well. I'm fond of potato heads, so if anyone knows, you don't have to repeat, but the little fellow in the lower left-hand corner of the slide is someone by the name of Darth Tater, not Vader, but Tater. And I collect quite a few potato heads, and Darth is my favorite one. And that has nothing to do with Agile, nor nothing to do with testing. But we're not going to explore your strategies. Normally, if I give this face-to-face, I want to get a sense from people of what are the current Agile strategies towards testing and quality, how are they linked together, and more specifically, what challenges are happening. Normally, the challenges in the room are just to give you a sense for what I hear when I do this presentation. And I've done it quite a few times, is automation is a challenge, teamwork is a challenge, respectful teamwork, avoiding scrum or fall often comes up, so that testers are sort of getting work skewed to the end of the sprint. That's fairly common. Not having acceptance criteria or acceptance test in user stories, or struggling with that, struggling with having enough time to test, struggling with test planning is something that comes up quite a bit. And again, you have to remember this is in the context of Agile. Agile's been around for a while, so I don't know if you're aware of it, but Scrum was first introduced in '93. So this thing that we call Agile isn't the new kid on the block anymore, and it hasn't been the new kid for quite a while. I mean, Scrum is over 20 years old. Kanban is probably, in software. Kanban in software is 5, 6, 7 years old, and these things have been around for quite a long time. So I'm a little surprised sometimes that I hear the struggles that I'm hearing. That's one of the reasons for the 3 pillars, and one of the genesis points for it. So some of the genesis for talking about 3 pillars. And that's not just the book, but the background of the model and what drove us here. First, I see way too many teams who are just sort of testing in Agile teams without a map or a plan. So testing, there's usually development strategy, there's usually DevOps strategy, there's usually an architectural strategy in Agile. Usually it means that it's not that uncommon to see it. Normally I see, testing's along for the ride, that it's a development-centric or technology-centric play, and that testing and quality is usually a second or a third-class citizen, but they're along for the ride. It's the technology folks that are driving things, and then as in the third bullet, where's quality, and that's sort of even behind the testing of what are the quality practices and things like that. So I observe this. I'm an Agile coach, and I get around and I speak quite a bit. Do a lot of public speaking, or a reasonable amount of that. I do a lot of Agile coaching and Agile training, and for years I've seen this pattern, and for years these patterns, and for years I've not seen them improving that drastically. So part of the genesis of the 3 pillars is to try to address that, to try to get some messaging out in the community, or a model out in the community, or thinking to adjust and extend people's thinking. I'm not sure how successful I've been, but I'm giving it the good old college try. As Rick said, I want to encourage people to type in questions along the way if you have them. And what we'll do is, if it's depending on the question, Rick will interrupt, and I'll try to address them sort of in line, in real time. So another genesis point of the 3 pillars is I've learned that balance is important in Agile testing and in Agile quality. And I'll tell a story just to illustrate this point. And this is a real client story. So here in Raleigh-Durham, there's a very large, it's probably the number 1 or number 2, no less than number 3. I think it's the number 1 or number 2 financial services firm in the world, banking firm in the world, and they have a relatively large development center here in North Carolina. And since I'm a local coach, and I know so many people that work there, they probably have 100 to 150 Scrum teams, plus or minus. So quite a few Scrum teams. And they're doing Kanban as well. And since I'm a local, relatively well-known coach, they've invited me in on occasion just to see what's happening, to collaborate with them, and to do some coaching. But they're less a client and more of a partner. And I always look at them as being relatively advanced. In this case, they were running thousands of acceptance test-driven development tests. Gherkin, they were using Cucumber, and it's Gherkin run amok. And they were running lots and lots of tests. And they had them wired to dashboards, and they were green and red. And they were both green and red, so some passing, some failing. But every day, on a team-by-team basis, you could see in their dashboards, in their information radiators, that the amount of test coverage was increasing, meaning the amount of acceptance tests, Cucumber tests was increasing. And they were focusing on that a lot, and life was good. I remember the first day I went there, and it was just team. I was walking down the hallways, and it was just team after team after team. And they had displays up for their automation coverage, and it was sort of a nirvana for Agile and for automation. And I got this sense as a coach that they were incredibly mature. It just, not artificially, there was a lot of maturity indicators in the culture. But then something happened, and it turned into, from a glad tale to a sad tale. That I went I was invited to a backlog refinement session. And if you know what that is, it's sort of, you're doing user stories, and you're doing backlog stories, and you're estimating, and you're slicing stories, and you're writing stories or rewriting stories and decomposing stories. And they invited me in more of as a fly on the wall, just to see how they were doing it. So here's this environment where they had, literally tens and tens of teams that were very mature from an acceptance test-driven development perspective. And what I discovered in the backlog refinement or grooming, if you've heard that term, meeting is they couldn't write a story to save their life. They couldn't they as a team, this one team, but it turned out to be it was an organizational or it was a systemic problem where they, as an organization, they were struggling with basic user story writing, basic estimation, consistency, understanding their velocity. They were really struggling with writing acceptance criteria or acceptance tests. If you know anything about Cucumber or ATDD, then I like asking that question in live sessions. Well, there's a problem here. What's the problem? So you have, on the one hand, you have incredibly mature automation running, Cucumber running, but and it's growing, and it's growing at an alarming rate, right? So coverage is increasing and life is good, and continuous integration is running as well. So there's platforms and things like that, and information radiators. So displays are running, and wiring is running, and CI is running, but then the organization can't write stories. So it begs the question of where are the acceptance tests coming from? And what the heck is this organization doing? And the acceptance tests, in this case, the answer is the acceptance tests should be coming from the user stories. And they should be coming from backlog refinement. And acceptance tests or the automation, Cucumber should not be an automation first conversation or or task. It should be story-driven from the conversation that then develops a set of acceptance criteria, and you can phrase them in Gherkin. You can phrase them as Cucumber tests, and then you can automate them. But what this partner was doing was not that, and so they were literally using Cucumber as an automation vehicle, and there was literally no value or indiscriminate value or indeterminate value as to what the heck, what value the tests were. They certainly weren't customer connected or story connected or product owner connected, which is the intent of the darn things. So what hit me in the face, and then I wandered around this client for a while, and what I saw was this disparate set of practices, whereas in some cases there were very mature practices being executed, and in some cases there were very immature practices being executed. And the sum total was they were out of kilter. They were out of balance. And I put on my thinking hat as a partner and a friend. I'm like, what can I do to help these guys and to have a better, more holistic view to agile quality and testing, because they're misfocused. And this is a common pattern that I see. And in their case, they were actually focused on the technology stuff, this interesting stuff, the writing code stuff, the automation stuff. So they had this pesky enthusiasm around that, and they were missing some of the more boring aspects, like just basic story writing. And that is what led to the 3 pillars. And this is the 3 pillars. There's nothing magical about it. It's just a framework. The intent is to make it your own. I'm going to go through it relatively quickly, and then I'll drill into each pillar in a little bit more detail. So let's start with the foundation. What's important in the foundation? So there's foundational elements in Agile teams that I've found to be incredibly important. One of them is a whole team ownership of quality. One of the things in this, and I'll pick on this partner as an example, and they clearly were the genesis, but they're not. These patterns are pretty pervasive. And the lack of a lot of this stuff is out there and continues to be out there. What I mean by a whole team ownership of quality is that everyone tests, and everyone looks at their responsibility of building in quality. And when I mean everyone, it's not just the testers, it's the developers, it's the BAs, it's the entire team. So the entire team plans testing. So if the organization has a test plan, then everyone contributes to it. If they're doing risk-based testing, which I would argue that you should be, then everyone contributes to where is the risk, what should we test and what shouldn't we test, and that decision making. That would include the product owner even, that would include the developers, that would include an architect on the team or whatever. There's a focus on knowing the right thing to build, so on the requirement side, on being really, and this is where that partner was missing it, it's not just writing stories, but having those meaty and juicy conversations around the stories that qualify, do we know what we're building? Is it the right thing? Have we established the why? Have we established the MVP for this, the minimal viable story or the minimal viable product for this story? Have we created the simplest possible story that would delight the customer? It's knowing it's that conversational-based debate. And then there's the once we have it, then building it right. And they were sort of in the building it right. They were using Cucumber to try to qualify some of that stuff, but they weren't having the conversations. So it goes beyond just writing the stories. Writing them is just the beginning. It's the conversation bit that's so important. Metrics, having a notion of steering or a community of practice is another foundational element. And then having this notion that we balance or we rebalance and we recalibrate, and we have a framework that we recalibrate against, and that's the intent of the 3 pillars. So that last bullet is really sort of recursive. It's, are we on some cycle, are we quarterly analyzing where we're at, what we've improved, what we've not improved, and are we recalibrating and then refocusing our strategies? So there's a foundation. I don't think the foundation ever really gets solved. So for example, and my experience is, knowing the right thing to build, you're never done with that because you may be working on a team may be working on different products or different releases. Whole team ownership of quality is never done. And I'm trying not to be a pessimist, but you know, teams are volatile things. People come and people go. Teams get reformed. So I don't think the foundational elements are something that you work on for 3 months and then you're done with them. Whereas some of the pillar elements you can actually probably achieve some maturity in it, and then you might do corrective action every once in a while, but you can sort of move on to something else. So you're continuously working on the foundation. There's 3 pillars believe it or not, in the 3 pillars. And I don't want to get caught up on what's in each pillar nor the heading at the top of each. I'm going to change the headings for you. So the first pillar is going to be technical stuff. Let's call it technical stuff, tool stuff, tooling, technical stuff, CI, continuous deployment, continuous integration, dashboards, wiring, automation, absolutely automation, looking at the pyramid-based automation, so unit test levels and middle tier levels like Cucumber, and UI levels, perhaps using Selenium. So looking at a broad brush view of different layered automation, doing behavior-driven development, acceptance test-driven development, TDD, test-driven development. All of that technical stuff would be in pillar number 1. If you're using different tools, for example, I don't know, performance tools, I would throw those things into pillar number 1 as part of your context. So you can add, change, and delete. So pillar 1 is the technical stuff, and I would include development tools. So it's not just testing, but it's sort of functional silo agnostic. So if there's tools, coverage tools that the development team is using, I would throw them into pillar 1. Pillar 2 is testing, what I would call testing practices. Good old-fashioned testing practices. For example, I mentioned earlier, like risk-based testing and using risk-based testing techniques. Having this notion of functional risk-based testing and non-functional. So functional, non-functional testing. So you have broader coverage and more thoughtful coverage. I think of exploratory testing as being a wonderful agile tool or technique, and I would put it into the second pillar. Anything that we do, planning, standards, templates, oh my, all of those things, if you're using mind maps for test planning or for risk-based testing, a friend of mine that I've worked on the 3 pillars with, Mary Thorne and I, Mary gets a great deal of traction out of using mind mapping tools. And even though it's a tool, I would put it into, it's really supporting testing practices in the middle pillar. So you fill that up with things you've historically done. And a lot of Agile teams stop that, and I don't know why. So for example, I see so many teams, and at this partner I was talking about, they were pretty good at risk-based testing when they were doing waterfall. And suddenly when they went Agile, they stopped doing risk-based test plans. And I was like, why did you do that? It's still relevant. Now, the scope may be far reduced. It may be a sprint-ly level of scope versus a release-ly level of scope. But that technique can be incredibly valuable to you because you don't want to be testing everything, and you don't want to be just testing in a by row way, given how much time you have. So plans are good. Tactics are good, strategies are good, and having such things, you probably want to move them from being tester-centric to being team-centric, but don't throw those things out. And then the third pillar is what I would call the soft stuff, is the hard stuff. And I know that's not cross-functional team practices, but and some of the soft stuff is, for example, pairing, what I would call pairing or three amigo practices, having team-based pairing. And this would be developer to developer pairing, developer to tester pairing, developer tester product owner pairing, having a stop the line mindset where anyone can stop the line and then fix something. Code reviews and standards, and actively participating in code review and having standards. Having active doneness, and what I mean, or definition of done. So the first part of active doneness is actually having a definition of done. Believe it or not, again, I get around and I speak a lot, and one of my poll questions for audiences is always how many people actually have, and these are by and large Agile audiences, and very often they're tester. The majority of folks are testers, or test backgrounds, and probably maybe 30% of the folks on average have a definition of done. That's a 70% of folks in Agile context don't even have something as simple and as sort of critical as a definition of done. I don't even know how they operate without it. Having aggressive refactoring and tidying up technical debt. So having the courage. So one of the parts here is teams can talk about refactoring and they can talk about technical debt, but actually doing something about it and having that professionalism and that focus on craft to actually craft stories and fight for stories and fight for technical debt. Fight's probably, but sort of make the case for. Fight was probably too aggressive. I apologize for that. User stories, having that three amigo-based conversations around the user stories. This goes back to that partner I was referring to. I mean, not only couldn't they story write, but they missed the whole conversation. They missed conversations being the most important part of a user story. And it's not just developer-centric conversations, but it's pair-based or three amigo-based conversations. They were non-existent. They were so focused on whacking out as many like cucumber tests as possible, whether they had value or not. They were really focused on coverage, and that was one of the root causes. Is that's how they were incented. Their leadership team was really sort of clueless, and they incented them. So be careful what you incent people or what you measure. And they measured, automation coverage, and guess what they got? They got oodles and oodles of coverage. It just didn't matter, and it certainly didn't connect to value, and it didn't connect to the customer. So, taking a look at the three pillars, it's technology-based stuff, testing practices. The soft stuff is the hard stuff, with some foundational elements. The key thing, and I'll come back to it at the end, it's not the individual pillars, but it's balancing across the pillars. That's where the balance term, you're going to hear me say that hopefully a few more times. So the partner I was talking about, they were heavily invested in pillar one, and they were incredibly lightly invested in pillar three. In a space where they wanted to connect the dots between stories and three amigo conversations and pairing with the activity of the automation. So literally what they needed to do was back off of the automation and increase the focus, so rebalance themselves. But they didn't have a model to look at to say, we're in balance. They just were charging forward. When we presented this to them, they found it useful. not from a prescriptive way where they actually changed some of the things. They removed code reviews and standards, or they made it their own. But the point is, establishing 3 pillars with some foundational elements that are mapped to the context of the organization. For them, it was very useful. And it gave them the ability to start having some conversations around the pillars. Again, no magic though, and I'm not trying to hold these up. This is just sort of a mental model to keep folks sort of, think of it as a menu and make sure that, you know, we're getting vegetables and we're getting starches and we're getting protein and we're not getting too much or too little of any of those things. Can you tell that I'm dieting at the moment? And that we have a balanced plate of those things, and that's really what the pillars are talking about. And then the foundational elements are maybe the diet. You know, are we doing the South Beach? So there's probably some principles of whatever dieting approach that is underneath the plate. And that's not a bad analogy. It's the first time I pulled it out of thin air, so I hope it holds weight. But that's the analogy. So whole team, let's get into each one briefly. Whole team ownership of quality, so building it right. Everyone tests. One of my measures for whole team quality is if at the end of the sprint, if the developers, if you're doing Scrum or Fall, one measure if you have whole team quality is instead of the developers wanting to run to the next sprint and work on new stories in the next sprint, they stop the testers and say, hey, we gave you code late, incredibly late. Can we run those nasty manual test cases that take you forever and that are boring and drudgery to run? We'll run those for you, and you can run the interesting stuff because that's what you do. You're test experts. And they run in with a smile on their face, and they test and test and test and give feedback, and they willingly do it. Not because they like it, and not because it's their background, but because it's the right thing for them to do, because they're contributing to getting the sprint done, because they look at their role not as a silo. They're not done. So code complete has no merit. They understand that story complete is what matters, and any team member should be contributing to story completeness before they jump into their silo and start coding the next thing or the next thing. Healthy Agile-centric metrics. Look at quality and value and predictability and even team health. I've done blog posts about sort of the 4 cornerstones of the 4 horsemen or the horse people or the of metrics, and so we're having some quality metrics, but also looking at, are we delivering value to the client? Maybe doing polls or surveys. Are we predictable? What's our throughput? Do we have predictable throughput? Are we biting off what we can chew and delivering what we can chew? And then is the team healthy? Meaning morale, stability in the team. Is there too much volatility? Is there too much multitasking of the team? So having some healthy Agile-centric, not traditional waterfall metrics, but having some Agile-centric metrics. Do we have a sense? Are we unabashedly having a repository where we provide guidance like story templates and test plan templates that are lightweight, that are Agile, but we're not afraid. We're not running away from process. We're not running away from the notion of a template. We're not running away from the notion of planning, which can be good. And then are we recalibrating? Are we strategizing? Are we focusing on a few things in the pillars from one? Are we picking a healthy menu and then working on it for a quarter, making progress, and then do we reevaluate? And then do we pick another menu? And we use the pillars to drive our continuous improvement. So the foundation is focused on that. A central part of the automation is I'm a strong proponent, and I would bet that all of you have heard of this this pyramid strategy for Agile automation, where there's not just one tool, but you take a pyramid view to unit tests, so lower tiered code level automation plus middle tier below the UI automation plus UI automation. And the investment is, the majority of the automation investment is at the unit tier. The next investment is at the middle tier. And the least investment is at the UI tier because that has the most stability, that has the most volatility, that has the most fragileness. That Mike Cohn, I think, coined that strategy. He called it the Agile Test Automation Pyramid. I've written blog posts about it. You can Google that for a little bit more information. But it's an incredibly effective strategy. I think in the pillars, highly recommend that strategy. So it's not a one-size-fits-all strategy. So we're not just trying to automate everything from the UI level, or we're not trying to automate everything from the unit level. We're not opposed to having multiple tools that can interact. 100% automation is not the goal. That was one of the mistakes that my partner made, is they were aspiring to 100% automation. The metrics, the measures were disengage your brain, don't think about testing, and just write as much automation code as you possibly could. And since the measures were driving them that way, that's sort of where the behavior went. And we don't want to do that. So I look at automation as just part. Manual testing is not the enemy. We can attack testing coverage with manual testing. We can attack it with exploratory testing, incredibly effective. We can attack it with automation, obviously. And Agile is a high degree of automation play, but you don't want to overdo it, which is the point. Mature teams invest in automation and tooling. Trying to get that technical debt reduction is part of the definition of done. In a preferred world, I'd rather have the automation be part of the definition of done for a story. What I mean by that, and I think this is the essence of this pillar, is if a story comes into a sprint, I want to complete the automation for that story as much as I want the team to complete the functional implementation of that story. So the automation is delivered with the story. It's demonstrated with the story. If it has value to write, 50 automated tests for a particular story in a sprint, we're going to do all 50 of them. That's part of the done for that story. We're not going to punt it. We're not going to deliver the functionality in sprint 1 and then throw the automation on a backlog and we'll get to it later. My experience is rarely do we get to that. So it's worth investing. That's part of the product investment. We start thinking of automation as an investment, as part of the price of functionality. The second pillar, exploratory testing. I want you to revisit, if you're in an Agile environment, I want you to rethink or revisit your use of exploratory testing. And when I say exploratory testing in this case, my view is it's session-based exploratory testing, so that we're having sessions and charters, so 90-minute sessions, and you can do some research on that. The other thing is we're pairing. We're having developer-to-developer pairing, developer-to-tester pairing, even folks outside the team. At one company I worked at, our sessions, when we did a session-based, we scheduled time every sprint. I think Thursday afternoon, right before the end of the sprint, we would do an exploratory test fest. And we had about 50 charters that would cover the app. So 50 pairs of people, and we had 2 sessions. So 25 pairs were working at one time, and then we would do the second 25 pairs. And I remember our customer support folks, people on the teams fought to pair with someone in customer support because they inherently knew how the customers were actually using our software. And we got better, not only did we get better exploratory testing coverage with that pairing, but we had better learning, better empathy, and better test design, because we would uncover things that we weren't typically covering in our test coverage, and then that would serve as test design. As part of this, you don't want to measure. You want to change that traditional measure if you're doing traditional test management. You don't want to measure the notion of testing or tester progress. Instead, you want to measure throughput or output. So it would be an anti-pattern in an Agile sense to measure testers. You don't care about bathroom breaks per tester, per test case, per day, per minute any longer. Because if you measure the testers, then you're reaffirming the silo. If you measure the developers, you're reaffirming the silo. You want to change that view and measure the team. So everything is about team throughput or team-based throughput or the output or sprint outcomes. If there's an escape at a team level where a defect escapes the team or a definition of done escape, that's not, you don't blame someone, you don't throw them under the bus. It's the team that you bring the focus on. And I expect the team to figure out corrective action if they have to do a root cause. And then I had talked earlier about risk-based Really, I think Agile is an extension of traditional risk-based testing strategies. It's just quicker and faster and more iterative, and it requires you to be more nimble on your feet. But it's those same techniques, and even increase your techniques. You want to be very sort of nimble with your risk-based play. The other thing is get your stakeholders involved. So your product owners should be involved in your test planning and your coverage. Another way of saying it is making sure that they're participating in the risk. I mean, part of risk-based testing is sort of surfacing the risk and agreeing on what we're going to de-risk and what the risks we're going to accept. That's not the tester-only responsibility. I'm arguing that's a team responsibility now, and the product owner is included in those team-based decisions, i.e. that's taking a balanced business view, technical view, quality view to risk, and then make good decisions. And like I was saying earlier, balance, balance, balance. You want to balance across manual, exploratory, and automation. Of course, a heavy investment in automation over time, but again, don't be afraid of having a variety of sort of testing strategies or testing approaches in coming in with your plans. And then the soft stuff is the hard stuff, cross-functional team. This is one of the hardest areas to get right culturally, but it's something that really means a lot. If you're looking at, going agile and being agile as a team, then this is the area it's not programmatic, it's not technical, but it'll have, I think, my experience is it has the highest impact to like increased efficiency or increased productivity or even increased fun in the team and increased morale and employee engagement. So I like the views of testers moving. I very often talk about testers moving to the front of the line. So the value proposition of testers and testing can be the testing itself, but I actually think there's much higher value in helping the product owner. So partnering with the product owner, asking lots of questions about minimizing stories and minimizing features, using that minimal viable product, minimal viable feature language, asking why are we implementing this, challenging the product owner, challenging clients, taking a story. If you're in an environment where if you're a tester or another team member, I don't care who it is, but get up, get out of your chair and go talk to real clients, see how they work. Do informal usability studies before you just blindly implement stories. One of the things we're trying to do is not just implement stories right, but part of that implementing stories right is what to avoid. Implementing a story that no one really cares about, which is a waste of time. So putting on that mindset of lean waste avoidance is part of this as well. That's one of those hard things. That's how teams actually go fast. Having cross-team, really focusing on good cross-team behavior, cross-team trust. I have so many clients nowadays. When we first did a few years ago when I said Three Amigos, no one knew what I was talking about. They thought about the movie. There was a Three Amigos movie with Chevy Chase, I think, and Martin Short. I think I'm getting it right. Whatever, that's not important. But that was the movie that came up. Nowadays, folks are this notion of pairing around story collaboration, around story clarification, pre-execution. A lot of teams are really embracing that. They're really getting the value of that notion where we refine stories sort of iteratively and continuously. We get them ready for the sprint, and that makes sort of implementation details and implementation clarity and requirement clarity so much easier. And the Amigos continue into the sprint. So the Amigos are a pre-sprint sort of backlog refinement activity. Then they're in the sprint during execution of the story. And the Amigos dissolve for that story when the story is done, when the product owner signs off on it. And again, keep in mind the product owner is one of the Amigos in this case. And I talked about stop the line mindset and active doneness. How am I doing on time? Not too badly. I wanted to switch gears from the pillars and talk to you a little bit about, just strategies. And it starts with empowering testers and creating this whole team view towards quality. So critical early steps of creating a sense of, what are some of the focus points for that? Applying test standards across all teams. I know that sounds, I can hear people saying, well, that's not Agile. Telling teams what to do isn't. They're self-directed teams. I would argue that it's not bad to have constraints. Most organizations have constraints. If you're working in a regulated environment, you have some auto constraints. That's what I'm talking about. These are healthy, Agile-esque constraints. Contribute to non-trivial definition of done. What I mean by that is I don't think a definition of done is sign-off. So I see this is not too common, but it's not uncommon, where we have one definition of done that the product owner signs off in the story. I would like to see more, more clarity around what done means beyond just a simple sign-off. Defining a core set of KPI metrics. Having active participation in sprint planning and backlog refinement. And what I mean by that is everyone is an equal partner. I still see in backlog refinement sessions, the testers cluster at one end of the table, the developers cluster at the other end of the table. The developers throw story points. The testers throw different story points, and then they argue. The developers try to disrespect the testers and who are higher, and they laugh at them and like, you don't know, it's trivial, it should be 1 point. And it's not healthy, it's not balanced, it's not respectful, it's not a whole team. And we want to get to that active participation where all voices count, all opinions count. We're trying to get team-based behavior. That's some of that early critical steps. Scrum Masters should be focusing on this. Coaches should be focusing on it. But it's incredibly important, I think, as a foundational element. This sets the stage for a lot of the pillars. Some cross-functional team practices. What are some strategies? Training is clearly, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a trainer. It's Agile is simple but hard. I hope you've all heard that. It's simple. The Scrum Guide is an 18-page document. I can read it in my sleep. It's 30 minutes. I can read it several times. It's straightforward. My children have read it. It's just straightforward. But the execution of Agile is incredibly nuanced and incredibly challenging at times because it's bringing pesky people and cultures into play and leaders into play. And it's about cultural change and transformational change. So training can help. Teaming, for example, focusing on a teaming model like the 5 Dysfunctions by Pat Lencioni could help. Getting coaches and Scrum Masters to reinforce pairing. Defining some aggressive doneness for teams. Not overly aggressive, but not being afraid to be slightly prescriptive if it's called for. Implementing coding standards, there I said it, and code reviews, for gosh sakes. There's nothing wrong with that. They can be incredibly lightweight. They can be team-driven from the point of view of who's involved, but having them from a quality point of view. And then having your backlogs have bug and refactoring and automation targets so that the backlogs are not just feature-rich, or sometimes I call it featureitis, where backlogs, all they contain is features, and no one is tidying up bugs, and no one is tidying up sort of refactoring or automation framework work. Some organizational quality strategy tips. One of the nice things about the pillars is it gives you a framework to communicate, to one, create a vision, and then 2, communicate your vision. And you can unify the vision across development and testing and product. And you want to do it that way. You want to look at the pillars as not testing-centric. That's one of the things I regret about maybe the title, is it sounds quality. I mean, it is Agile Quality and Testing. In the book, I never couple it to an org chart, a QA team or a test team org chart. It's really an organizational view, but it can be misconstrued. Your strategy, like I said, must be aligned and shared. Keep working your strategy across the pillars. Don't get too narrow, like that partner I talked about. Make your strategy visible in your information radiators. So my partner, when they started adjusting to the 3 pillars, they got less coverage, and that was good. So they started showing that, and leaders started walking around and saying, if a team wasn't adjusting, it's like, why are you focusing on writing automation when you don't know what the heck you're doing? You need to, where's the story writing going on. So that level of transparency helped folks ask the right questions to, encourage teams to make those adjustments. And then having some quarterly readouts and celebrate your successes can really help. So key goals of the 3 pillars. My partner in crime writing the 3 pillars, I mentioned her earlier, is Mary Thorne. If you get the book, and you can get a free copy of the book, a PDF, just by joining my mailing list on my website. And if you get the book, you'll see that there's probably 50 or so stories in it from Mary. We call them Mary's Corner, where in some cases she'll bring up a different tool or a different view. In many cases, she disagrees with me, so you get like different perspectives through the book. And Mary uses this. Mary's a director of QA at a relatively large financial services company here in Raleigh. So I'm a pointy-headed consultant, but she lives in the real world as a leader, and she uses the pillars for her testing strategies. And it's an Agile shop. It's a safe, scaled Agile framework shop. And she talks about it in terms. She has this phrase of, it helps her define what does good look like in Agile. What if you're talking about goodness from a team and from a testing and from a quality point of view, what are the aspects of quote unquote good? And I like that because it is sort of ambiguous, and it helps to have some targets. And so whole team ownership, and this is not a sort of an exhaustive list, but build the right thing, definition of done, having readiness, just enough, just in time mindset, results value equals working code, so focusing on results and value and working code. Context-based testing, that's the exploratory testing comes in there. Thinking about what you're testing and why you're testing it, so risk-based. 3 amigos, not just at a team level, but at an organizational. So leaders, your VP of development and your VP of testing and QA and your VP of product should form their leadership set of amigos, guiding the Agile transformation. Focusing on incredible feedback, and then this notion of balance across a framework. So the key takeaway, balance within each of the pillars, across foundation, across the organizational, what I'll call the organizational 3 amigos, leading towards this broad incremental organizational quality and testing strategy. It's that simple, but it's that hard to get in the right way. I'll go back. I'll use this to wrap things up. I'll go back to my partner. What they started to do, based on that story I told you, they de-emphasized some of the cucumber tests. They de-emphasized selenium. It actually turned out that they were investing very lightly in unit tests, far too lightly. So part of their initial adjustment to their strategy, or lack thereof, is they increased unit. They maintained their focus on continuous integration, and they had dashboarding and visual feedback nailed, so they just continued that. They did not, it turned out that they weren't attacking technical infrastructure in their backlog so much and technical debt, so they started lightly to focus on that. Then they went into the cross-functional team practices, and they went all in on user stories, writing user stories. They did some training. They focused on 3 amigos at a team level as sort of a paradigm for how they were going to develop their stories, not just so how they're going to write them, how they're going to dissect them, how they're going to plan them, how they're going to execute them and deliver them. They really started to look at technical debt. They lacked courage to write, and they were a little lazy in writing technical debt stories in their backlogs. A lot of the teams looked at it as a product owner job to do that when it's a team job. I mean, imagine a product owner trying to write technical debt stories. So they started focusing on that, and they really went to active doneness. And that was their focus there, and that there's some connection between that and the first pillar. And then one of the things they did in the middle tier is really emphasize the planning, because they weren't doing a lot of planning at all, and so they didn't really have a method, or their planning was automate everything, and they started doing some risk-based planning and some test planning at a sprint level and at a release level. And they focused on whole team ownership down to the foundation. They started focusing on just whole team ownership of quality, because what really was happening at a team level is they had many silos in each team. And that's what they bit off. That was their strategy for a few quarters, and that was their adjustment. And then they reevaluated, and then they started shifting. And they continue to use the framework to this day as a framework. And they've made it their own. So feel free to erase some things, add some things into the categories that I give you, but get to the spirit of the pillars. And I hope that's helpful. Like I said, you can go to rgalen.com. I'm not selling you anything, but you can get a free copy of the book. The other thing, if you go do that we have Mary and I developed an Excel spreadsheet that's an assessment sheet, a 3 pillars assessment sheet. It turns out that it's really helpful to look at the book and then look at the assessment worksheet. It complements the book quite nicely, and it'll give you a real view of how to use the pillars to attack your strategy in your own organization. So I think the spreadsheet is a useful view in how to use the pillars in the real world. It certainly does no damage, and you can get both for free on the website. Other than that, I want to thank you all for the time. I was expecting to get done a little bit earlier. I have time for questions if there are any. Otherwise, I want to wish you all well, and I hope you all have a nice day.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob, and yeah, thank you, everybody. So I have a few questions here, and if anyone else has other questions, please enter them into the questions dialog box, and we'll definitely answer them, or do our best to answer them. So, Bob, a few questions here that we have. One is you mentioned about risk-based testing a few times, obviously, throughout, and that's important to do. So when it comes to collaborating with, our BAs, development, QA, all of those things, how does that look in relation to risk-based testing? Are you just conversations across, teams? Is it, formal? Every sprint we do this. How do you typically see that or recommend doing that?
Well, it is collaboration. So when I say risk-based testing, it starts at a team level. So minimally, let's say a team's composed of a BA, a tester, to front-end development, back-end development, and maybe a half-time architect, scrum master, and a product owner. I just pulled that out of thin air. It's a 7 ± 2 team in size. I would expect that team to have some methodology that they attack sprint-by-sprint test planning for what they're going to bite off. So the story mix that they're going to bite off, I would hope that they would take a look at it, not just from a design point of view, but from a testing point of view, and apply risk-based techniques. Not just for the work in this sprint, but I would want them to look back at previous sprints and then to decide, hey, given what we're changing this sprint and what we've already effectively delivered in previous sprints, what's the most responsible amount of testing and coverage that we need to do in a risk-based fashion? So the team would be that cross-functional team. It's a conversation with maybe some templates or a very lightweight document and a very lightweight ceremony. It would happen towards the beginning of sprint. So to me, it would either happen before sprint planning, during sprint planning, or right after sprint planning, because it would have an effect on the sprint commitment. If the team has cross-team, meaning you're in an environment with multiple teams, and so other folks can contribute to your risk, then I would invite those participants, as long as it's not 100, cast of 100. Let's say one team is working with 2 other teams and there's some sort of dependency risk. Well, then invite them to those ceremonies and decide how you're going to interact that. Hopefully those other teams are doing the same thing, so you can figure out who's going to cover what. I hope that helped.
Yeah, no, definitely. I just wanted to see how it related and how you see that happening, so that makes sense. Another question is, from the 3 pillar standpoint, you talked about having the balance of the 3 pillars, and it sounds like we're gonna want to work towards optimizing those pillars and adding to them and building on what we're already doing. If you had to choose one thing from each pillar to start with or to start optimizing on, what would you recommend?
Oh, I don't. It's really so context-based. So I'll try to pick something, but and it's not a reluctance on my part, but it really, that's the hard part, is up to you all, so whoever's listening in. So whole team ownership of quality, I just see that as a pattern where people are throwing things over the wall to each other in teams. They say they're agile, but they're really not. So I might cherry pick that from the foundation. Automation, a lot of organizations are under investing in automation, so I would probably pick that from the first pillar. There's not a lot of collaboration sometimes. I probably would pick three, user stories are still something that folks struggle with. So probably from the third pillar, definition of done. Pairing goes with three amigos. I think there's tremendous bang for the buck in those things, and it takes time to establish, to make those changes in team culture. And then from the middle tier, I would really focus on just planning. I see so many teams that don't plan, and we seem to have thrown out the notion of test planning and risk-based test planning out. What is that expression, out, throw the baby out with the bathwater? And I see so many folks that throw that out. So probably on the planning side. And then if you're not using exploratory testing at all in an Agile context, that would be something to pick up early on as well. Everything I just said is going to get you a lot of, from my point of view, a lot of bang for the buck in sort of driving maturity and driving what I would call a being Agile mindset.
Right. Perfect. That's very helpful. Gives us, something to think about as far as what to focus on or how we can help. Now, another one here is we have a lot of audience members who are practitioners, engineer level, senior engineers, may not be executives that have that necessarily a lot of control from a top-down perspective on how to the cross-functional team aspects, the collaboration aspects, implementing those types of things. So if I'm an engineer and I've been at the organization, how can I implement some of the collaboration techniques, like, whether it's refactoring with my other team members, should I just get my teams together and try to do that every so often? Should I, from a user story perspective?
So I'd say you can do that. One of the targets for the three pillars is really not the individual tester. The target is management and leadership, and it's cross-functional. My experience tells me I see so many testers that they're trying to collaborate in their Agile teams, and I'm going to pick on developers, and the developers just thumb their nose, and it's like, no, they're not rude, but it's like, no, we do this and you do this, and we'll throw things over the wall. In order to really drive what I would call that whole team ownership of, or let's say whole team collaboration, I don't think that can be driven just at a team level. I don't think a pesky tester can transform the culture of their team through the sheer force of their will. I think the leaders of the organization, the test leader, quality leader, plus the development leader, plus the product leader. Remember I was saying that there's a leadership level of the three amigos. I think those folks need to be in sync and coaching their teams to that in such a way that they're selling or convincing them that collaboration is important, that pairing, for example, is important, and they're paving the way. So now you have the leaders are setting that example and messaging it that way, and then you have people who are behaving that way in the teams, and then the two meet. But I don't think it's a team-driven. I don't think you've got that nirvana state of fully collaborative, self-directed, Agile teams with leadership sitting on their butts, just hoping and praying that some magic is going to happen. It requires leadership. It requires coaching. It requires message, and it requires alignment. You with me? Mission and vision alignment. For example, on doneness, the testers cannot be the sole arbiter of definition of done. The technology manager, the development managers need to be emphasizing that done is incredibly important, just equally the way the test leaders are. I hope that helps.
Right. No, definitely. I think that's exactly right. So, great. So we are 1 minute to the hour. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us today. Bob, thank you for presenting. I definitely learned a lot and appreciate the, for me, take home for me was connecting our work and to value, and just because we have a lot of automation coverage, for example, doesn't mean that the coverage is actually covering the right items or giving us bugs early or reducing our testing time, and so it's important to really step back and balance all these areas together. So appreciate you presenting, Bob, and again, thank you for donating a book to raffle off to our group, and we'll be recording this and putting this online as well for all of our members to view. So thank you, Bob, again, and thank you everyone for joining us, and please go to meetup.com and look for our future events as well.
My pleasure. Have a nice day, everyone. Bye-bye.